Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to Quarantine with the Camera, first episode. Today we'll be getting into camera basics, 3 settings you need to know to get into photography, and a few other things that I'll touch on for all those beginner photographers. So a little background on me. I've been practicing photography as a hobby since 2013. Around 2014, I started a business in portrait photography, and I've been practicing that since then, but I've also dove into landscape photography, street photography, event photography, and also wedding photography. So what I plan to do with this series is get all of those people interested in photography and all those beginner photographers the proper tools and techniques to actually practice during this quarantine time. We're not just sitting around. Of course, if you want to sit around, that's fine, but we could also grab a camera while we're sitting around. You don't have to be out and about or traveling to practice these things that I will include in these series. So let's get into it. The first thing I want to go over is what you'll need to get into photography, which will include the camera, the lens, and a memory card. Camera is going to be your workhorse. That's where you're going to change most of your settings. Your dials and adjustments will be on your camera. Now, if you have a phone and you're planning to get into phone photography, you can follow the settings that I will go over later. And we will do another video on phone photography, which will be the second episode of this series. So following that, the lens will attach to the camera, and that will pass all of the light and information to the camera. So it'll essentially be an eye to the camera. And next will be your memory card. That will store and receive all of the information that your camera is gonna need to save. So all of your images or video will be saved on a memory card. So now let's jump into cameras. There are many different types of cameras. You have film cameras, old film style where you have to load film to take pictures. You have point and shoot cameras where the lens does not detach from the camera. One of the most popular today, phone cameras, which are very capable with today's technology, and also digital cameras, which will be your DSLRs. I'm recording this video on mine, but I will include a photo in the video so you can check that out. So like I said, you're going to change all of your settings in your camera. And for those of you who do have the digital cameras or the film cameras where your lens detaches, we'll go into lenses next. So next, let's jump into lenses. Now with lenses, you also have multiple choices. You have what is called a prime lens, which does not zoom. This is one focal length. So this is an 85mm lens. This means if you want to zoom in, you have to walk towards your subject. And we also have zoom lenses where you can zoom through different focal lengths or ranges. So you will see these lenses that move and some do not, but this will give you a little bit more range in one lens. So with lenses, like I said, they're gonna pass the light through to your camera sensor. So this will give you the biggest change in an image you'll see will usually be in result of the lens and the settings used on that lens. Now, going a little bit further into lenses, as I stated, this is an 85mm. That is going to be a little bit more zoomed in than say a 50mm or a 28mm lens. And that's an easy way to understand it. Just look at the millimeter range as the higher number, the more zoomed in it's going to be. So if you have a 28mm lens, you're going to see more of your view in that camera. Now with the 85, the box may be a little bit smaller and zoomed in, so subjects may look a little bit bigger at the same range. So next you have your memory card. For digital photographers, this is going to be what stores all of your images or video and any information passed or that needs to be saved by the camera. You see there are different speeds and sizes on these memory cards. So the 64GB, of course, is going to save more images, and the 32GB is going to save less images. Now the different speeds, the read and write speeds, you can see it up there. That is going to be how fast the camera takes pictures and also replays pictures in the camera, how fast it reads and how fast it writes. A general understanding is the faster the better, because that way your camera's not freezing up trying to go from picture to picture, or you take 3 consecutive pictures fast and it's not lagging behind or it looks like it's loading to try to take the next picture. That may be from a slower write speed on your SD card or memory card. Now, the most popular memory card is the SD. There are cameras that use other memory cards, but for a lot of beginners, you're going to see an SD card being used. So the next thing I want to go over is going to be the exposure triangle, the most important thing in photography that needs to be understood. Now the exposure triangle is made up of 3 elements: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, which are all settings changeable by your camera. First, we'll go over shutter speed before jumping into the other 2 elements. So when explaining shutter speed, I always explain the lens as an eye. So think of your shutter speed as what controls how fast that lens is going to blink, or your eye is going to blink. So the shutters are going to open and close at a certain speed. Now shutter speed is measured in seconds. So we will see those pictures taken in the 1 second, 5 second, 10-second range, but a lot of pictures that are going to be taken are going to be in fractions of seconds. So you'll see your shutter speed at 1/5 of a second, 1/500 of a second. The smaller that fraction, the faster your lens is going to blink. So if I have 1/5000 of a second, my lens is going to open and close that fast. And if I have 1 second, the lens is going to actually stay open for 1 second and then close. So it controls how much light is getting to your camera sensor for a certain amount of time. Basically how fast your lens is opening and closing. So next we'll go into my favorite setting, aperture. Aperture is measured in f numbers. So don't get too hung up on that. I just wanted to get that out of the way. That f number you see is going to be your aperture. So the smaller the f number, the more light is going to get in, and the bigger your shutters are going to be open, and the larger the f number, the less light is going to get in, so the smaller the hole. And I'll show you on this film camera. So currently I have this this lens set at f16, and you can currently see that small pinhole of light getting through. Now if I open that up to f2, you see my lens is much more open. So I'll show you just stopping down and actually opening it up. To understand that a little bit more, just like with shutter speed, if all of your settings are the same and you change your aperture to a lower number, you're going to get more light in at that one time. And if you stop it down to say f16 with all of the same settings, you'll get less light. This is going to control how much light is getting in at one time. If shutter speed controls how fast that light is going to get in, or how long I should say the light is going to get to your sensor. So with aperture, a lot of people have asked me how do they blur out the background with their portraits or get focus on the subject. That is going to come with the lower number apertures, the f2, f2.8, f1.8 sometimes if you see that. What you're doing is you're changing your depth of field, which I won't get too much into. Just know that the lower number aperture is more light, and that's going to give you more focus on one subject. So I would be in focus at f2 and my background would be blurred out. Now with an aperture setting of f11 or something like that, I use that a lot in my landscapes, where you'll see something right in front of me is in focus and something maybe 10 feet to 20 feet back is also in focus. That's what you're going to want to do if you're doing landscape or stuff where you want extra details in it and you don't want the background to be blurred out as much. So just remember, the smaller number, more light, and a shallower depth of field, meaning you get a little bit of blurriness or bokeh, so to say, in the background. And the higher the f number, that's going to be more detail but less light. So the last setting in the exposure triangle that I'll talk about is ISO or ISO. So what this is basically is your camera's sensitivity to light. My most basic definition is when you're changing this setting, think of it as an artificial lamp in your camera that's going to help you gain more light in images. So if your aperture and shutter speed don't allow you to get the image you want, that image is too dark, change your ISO and that will bring a little bit more light into the image. Now the thing with changing ISO is you also get more noise. So the settings will go from, most cameras will start at ISO 100, which will provide the least amount of light in the ISO setting, and go upwards to ISO 12,000, and that will be a more grainy image, but it will be way lighter. So your camera is less sensitive to light at ISO 100, which is a great starting place, and it's more sensitive the higher you go. And like I said, with the noise, when you're handling noise in your images, and what the noise is that graininess that you'll see, you want to stay at those lower ISO numbers because it won't produce as much noise in your image. So if you can get the image with just changing your aperture and shutter speed, I would say stick to ISO 100. Now if you can't, then you can bump it up. ISO 400 is pretty safe in a lot of cameras, and even in some 800. Like I said, just play around with it. You'll find your own preference. Some people like a little bit of noise in different images, but ISO 100 is a great starting place. And you learn to change your shutter speed and aperture, and then you can introduce this into your photography also. So now that I've covered things you'll need to get into photography and the exposure triangle, I'll go over a few things that I would pick up as a beginner photographer that may help you out in the long run. So first, what I recommend is gonna be for more of those interested in landscape photography and street photography, things like that outside of portrait photography, is going to be a tripod. Now, here I have a very small tripod, but I recommend getting a tripod for stability. What this does is you mount your camera on top. It has 3 legs, tripod, and this will allow you to set your camera up so you can practice at those longer shutter speeds and also get clearer images when you have too much handshake or there's something that's staying still and you want to take pictures of it. This can help you out a lot. So a tripod is a great accessory for most photographers, but I don't practice my portrait photography on it. Some people do, I just don't, because I need the range of motion of having the camera in my hand. The next thing I recommend is going to be more so for those interested in portrait photography, and that's going to be a flash. Now, a lot of people use the on-camera flash. You need the flash that pops up on your camera when you first get it. A great recommendation that was recommended to me by other photographers when I started is getting an off-camera flash that is not connected to your camera, to practice with that. And this provides way more light than the on-camera flash does, and this is a very cheap option, the Neewer. I'll post a link to the model if they still make it. This is the one I started with when I started flash photography. And like I said, this will provide a flash of light in those dark situations where you're going to these places and venues where it's dark or you don't have enough light to work with and you don't want to use a steady light. A flash is a great way to bring that artificial light into a scene, which it takes practice and it can be frustrating, but I think it's a great tool to have just in case you need it. And to finalize, I want to answer a question I've gotten a lot during this quarantine and in my live sessions, and that is, what is a great beginner setup for those interested in photography? I'll put the links in the bottom of the video, but my number one recommendation is the Sony a6000, a great beginner's camera, but that will provide you with a great camera at a great price point. And my second recommendation would be something like a Canon T3i. And if you're interested in portrait photography, my first pickup would be another lens, which would be the 50mm 1.8. Sony and Canon have great options at great prices for that 50mm, and that will also give you an insight to how much a lens can make a difference in changing an image. So those interested in portrait photography, that will allow you to blur out that background, like I said, because it's a 50mm f1.8. So remember, we were speaking about apertures. That 1.8 is going to blur out the background and keep your subject in focus. So that is a great lens to start with if you are buying a lens with a camera. Now, your kit lens is going to be the lens that comes with your camera if you buy one with the lens. And that is also great to learn on, because a lot of people don't want to spend money right up front if they're just getting into photography and they don't know if they're going to like it or love it. So those are my recommendations, and like I said, I'll tag them below so you can check them out. So with that, I'll wrap up the first episode of Quarantine with a Camera. I appreciate everyone watching. Join me next week and we will be going over phone photography. So that episode will be Quarantine with the Phone. I'll go over phone photography, phone apps that will help you improve your phone photography, and go over a few settings that can be changed in your phones to help you get a better image. So that will be more tuned towards people who have a phone and are interested in photography, who may not want to get a camera or can't afford a camera and want to practice during this quarantine. So I appreciate everyone watching. If you could, like the video, share the video with your friends. Drop any questions you may have in the comments or any feedback you may have about this video. With those subscriptions, I can do more with my channel and I can improve on YouTube, and that will help me to get this information out to a lot more people. So have a great weekend, and I'll see y'all next time.